The Ithorian maggot princess writhed and whimpered in her cold, dark cell, but the slime-covered walls just echoed her pathetic alien cries, right back at her. No one was coming. Her people had abandoned her. They were too spineless to save her from the rival Zorgon-backed coup. Only one man in the galaxy had the quad to get her out of this mess. That man was human merc Timothy Harris, and he was her only hope. Harris sat alone in a dingy dive bar on Ithoria Prime, the seedy metropolis moon orbiting the Ithorian homeworld. He stared into his half-empty glass of synth whiskey, brooding. His reflection scowled back at him from the grimy countertop. Suddenly, a figure in a dark cloak slid into the seat beside him. It was Jackson, high-ranking Ithorian royalty, and brother to the missing alien princess. "You're my sister's only hope," Jackson said, his voice trembling slightly. "The Ithorian Council voted to abandon her to the Zorgons. They're using her to stage a coup. She's expendable to them. Acceptable loss. Please, the reward is yours if you bring her back alive." Harris snorted derisively. "I don't deal with Ithorian slime. Your kind can't be trusted. The Zorgons have been trying to establish a foothold in Ithorian space for years. If my sister stays captive, they'll use her as a puppet to seize our government. Don't you get it? This is only their first play." Jackson gestured at the view screen above the bar, showing Zorgon warships amassing on the borders. "What comes next will be a catastrophe for both our peoples. This is bigger than Ithoria. The Zorgons won't stop until they've crushed humanity under their talons too." That got Harris's attention. Humanity had stayed out of intergalactic politics for centuries. If the Zorgons had a stranglehold over Ithorian space, they'd be knocking on Sol's doorstep next. The old merc weighed the mission carefully. One life risked to save billions. Maybe this one alien princess was worth saving after all. "I'll do it," Harris growled, slamming back the dregs of his synth whiskey. "But this ain't a solo op. You're coming with me, Jackson. I'm keeping my eye on you, Ithorian. Any deception, any treachery, and I'll save the Zorgons the trouble of killing your sister. We clear?" The Ithorian royal gulped and nodded slowly, his earlier bravado evaporating under Harris's piercing glare. The battle-scarred merc and the simpering alien prince, one reluctant soldier and one cowardly diplomat. They were the most unlikely duo, but they were Princess Zara's only hope. Harris just prayed to the human gods that he wasn't making the biggest mistake of his life. Harris and Jackson wasted no time tracking down a stealth ship with bleeding-edge cloaking tech. Harris called in favors from his shadiest merc contacts, guys who asked no questions as long as the credits flowed. Within hours, they had their ride, a sleek Phantom-class corvette with a cloaking device that could hide it from the sharpest sensors. As they zipped through hyperspace towards the enemy stronghold, Harris grilled Jackson on the details. "So why'd they snatch your sister? What's her play in all this?" Jackson squirmed in the co-pilot seat, his clammy hands picking at the crash webbing nervously. "Zara's no friend of the Council. She's been pushing for Ithoria to build alliances against the Zorgons for years. Wants us to reach out to the humans, the Kintari, anyone who will stand with us. Council sees that as warmongering. They think we can appease the Zorgons, buy more time with concessions." Harris snorted. "Appeasement, oldest bad idea in the galaxy. How'd that work out for the Viltari or the Jux?" "Exactly, that's what Zara said. But her opposition to the Council's kowtowing made her a target, gave the Zorgon sympathizers on Ithoria an opening to grab her, make an example of her." As they dropped out of hyperspace near the stronghold's coordinates, the reason for its location became clear. It was nestled deep within a massive asteroid field, a treacherous, constantly shifting maze of space rock. Sensors pinged furiously as they scanned the stronghold, revealing concentric rings of cutting-edge sensor arrays englobing it. "Well, shit. So much for going in quiet," Harris muttered, eyeing the readouts. "Those sensor nets will pick up our cloak, no question. We need a new plan." Just then, a blip caught his eye on the scanner. A lumbering bulk freighter, clearly a supply ship headed for the stronghold. Its hull broadcast generic Ithorian industrial tags. Harris's eyes narrowed as a scheme started percolating. "Jackson, what did you say your family's main legit business was again?" "Huh? We have stakes in astro-mining, gas refineries, industrial concerns like that. Why? A predatory grin stretched across Harris's rugged features. Because I think we just found our ticket inside. The supply freighter never saw them coming. 1 minute it was making a routine approach to the stronghold. The next, a stealth ship rippled into view off its port side, matching trajectory. Harris was across the gap and cutting through the freighter's airlock with a plasma torch before the crew could even put out a distress call. In seconds, the freighter was theirs. Using the hijacked ship's credentials, they bluffed their way past the outer ring of sensor arrays and docked at the stronghold's main hangar without incident. Harris was first out of the airlock, his pulse rifle up and hot. Jackson followed close behind, clutching a pathetically small holdout blaster in one trembling hand. Almost immediately, a squad of armed Ithorians in the livery of the rival council faction descended on the docking bay, alerted by the unscheduled delivery. Harris didn't wait for them to ask questions. His pulse rifle chattered as he put down 3 with heart shots before diving behind a crate for cover. In seconds it was over. The Ithorian guards lay strewn about the hangar, leaking vital fluids from seared holes. Harris policed their weapons and tossed a pulse pistol to Jackson. The Ithorian noble looked greener than usual. Upside of being a merc. When shooting starts, I'm better at it, Harris growled. Let's find your sister and get off this rust bucket. They fought their way to the cell block, dropping Ithorians left and right. Harris was a one-man army, his pulse rifle and vibroblades reaping a bloody toll. A near miss from a plasma bolt seared his shoulder, but he just gritted his teeth and fought on. But when they finally breached the cell block, they found only empty cages. No princess. Harris's gut clenched as he watched Jackson frantically pound on a control console, scanning prisoner logs. Damn it! Harris smashed a fist into the console, making it spark and spit. We're 1 step behind, but now we know where to look. As alarms blared and more hostiles flooded the corridors, they blasted their way back to the docking bay and piled into their stealth ship. Harris punched the launch sequence as Ithorian troops peppered the hull with plasma bolts that slagged armor and burned deep pits. Plot a course for Zorgan space, Harris shouted over the din of enemy fire. We're done sneaking and hiding. This time we take the fight to them. As Timothy and Jackson zipped through hyperspace, hurtling towards Zorgon territory, Timothy's thoughts raced. He punched in a comlink code, hailing an old merc buddy. Garrick, you crusty old bastard. Need some intel on a Zorgan base deep in their turf. You've tangled with those scaled freaks before. What have you got for me? Garrick's hologram crackled into view, the grizzled merc's face etched with hard-won wisdom. Tim, you crazy son of a bitch, you're really going after a Zorgan stronghold? Those bastards. They're the meanest, cruelest sons of bitches I've ever seen. And their tech, it's beyond anything most humans have. Hell, it's beyond the Ithorians, too. You sure you're ready for this? Timothy's jaw set. Got no choice, they've got an Ithorian princess. The squid heads will fold if the Zorgans have her. It'll be their claws around everyone's throats next. Garrick nodded grimly. I hear you. All right, transmitting coordinates and a schematic. It's a few cycles old, but it's the best I've got. Place is a fortress. And Tim, watch your ass in there. Timothy keyed the data into the navigation computer, his mind already spinning through infiltration scenarios. Beside him, Jackson fidgeted nervously. Suddenly, proximity alarms shrieked. A patrol fleet of Zorgan destroyers shimmered into real space, disruptor cannons already glowing hot. Shit, ambush! Timothy wrenched the controls, sending the ship into a dizzying, evasive corkscrew. Disruptor bolts crackled past, barely missing the hull. Jackson strapped in, his face pale. We can't take on a whole Zorgan battle group. Timothy's hands flew over the weapons console, bringing the ship's cutting-edge armaments online. Watch me! He jinked and juked, using the ship's superior agility to weave between the lumbering Zorgon destroyers. Pulse cannons and fusion torpedoes lanced out, stitching the enemy hulls with explosions. But the Zorgans gave as good as they got. Shields flared and bucked as disruptor blasts hammered them. Warning lights flashed red across the control panel. Shields at 20%, we can't take much more of this, Jackson cried. Timothy gritted his teeth, preparing for a last desperate run at the destroyers. Suddenly a new set of contacts pinged the sensor screen. A squadron of human fighters, sleek and deadly, dropped out of hyperspace and tore into the Zorgon flank with a vengeance. "Cavalry's here, boys," a familiar voice crowed over the comlink. "Thought you could use a hand, Tim." Admiral Thorne's fighters scattered the Zorgon formation, pulse cannons shredding armor and scattering debris across the void. The destroyers reeled, their attention divided. "Get clear, Harris," Thorne barked. "We'll hold them off." Timothy didn't need to be told twice. He punched the hyperdrive and the stars stretched to infinity as they made their escape. "God damn, that was close," Timothy muttered, slumping back in his chair as the adrenaline ebbed. Thorne's face appeared on the comlink, grim but triumphant. "Tim, I've been tracking Zorgon movements for months. They're up to something big, something that could shift the balance of the whole damn galaxy. This princess of yours, her fate might just be the key to everything." Timothy nodded, his resolve hardening. "We're getting her back, Thorne, no matter what. You'll have my ships and any other support I can muster, but you need to move fast. I'll send you some access codes that should get you past the Zorgon border defenses. After that, you're on your own." The codes Thorne provided proved worth their weight in platinum. The stealth ship glided past sensor nets and patrol pickets like a ghost, the Zorgon base growing larger on the viewscreen. Garrick's intel paid off too. Timothy located a fluctuation in the base's shield grid, a tiny flaw in their defenses. He angled the ship's approach, holding his breath as they slipped through the gap with bare meters to spare. They set down in a secluded hangar bay, eerily empty of personnel. As they crept into the corridors of the base, a grim reality became clear. This was no mere military outpost. Strange devices and containment tanks lined the walls, filled with twisted, mutilated forms. Alien creatures barely alive moaned and writhed in agony. "My God," Jackson whispered, his face ashen. "What are they doing to them?" "To experiment," Timothy growled, "trying to unlock some kind of secret. And I'd bet my last credit the princess is part of it." A sickening realization settled in Timothy's gut as they pushed deeper into the nightmarish facility. The Zorgons were on the cusp of a breakthrough, some kind of knowledge or technology that would make their armies unstoppable. And Princess Zara was the key. It wasn't just her life in the balance anymore. It was the fate of every free species in the galaxy. The Zorgon plan had to be stopped, no matter the cost. Timothy checked the charge on his pulse rifle, his eyes hard as flint. "Come on, let's find her before it's too late for all of us." Timothy and Jackson crept deeper into the labyrinthine base, pulses pounding in their ears. Around every corner lurked the specter of Zorgon guards or some fresh nightmare from their twisted experiments. Suddenly they found themselves standing before a massive blast door, secured with biometric locks and thrumming with energy. Jackson's eyes widened. "That's a Zorgon high-security lab. Whatever they've got in there, it's their crown jewel." Timothy set to work on the lock, his hacking tools sparking and whirring. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with arcane machinery. And there, in the center, was Princess Zara. She hung suspended in a web of cables and tubes, her eyes closed, her face pale. Beside her, connected to the same macabre apparatus, were the unmoving forms of a dozen other beings from across the galaxy, limp as marionettes with their strings cut. "My gods," Jackson gasped. "That's Councillor Zimbar. He vanished weeks ago, just before Zara was taken. We thought the Zorgons assassinated him, but this is worse." Timothy approached the machine warily, his eyes tracing the tangled conduits that bound the captives. They're alive, but not here. Like their minds are somewhere else. As if in answer, the screens surrounding the machine flickered to life, displaying scenes of conquered worlds and subjugated peoples. Zorgon forces marching beneath alien skies, their talons stained with blood. Jackson paled as realization dawned. It's not just a prison, it's a weapon. They're using them, controlling their minds to conquer their own people. Timothy raised his pulse rifle, preparing to blast the abominable device to scrap. But before he could fire, Alarms shrieked to life throughout the complex. A booming voice echoed from the intercom, cold and imperious. "Attention all personnel. Intruders detected in Sector Sigma. Lethal force authorized." "They know we're here," Timothy snarled. "We need to get Zara and the others out now." He and Jackson leapt to the machine, hands flying over the controls as they sought to safely disengage the prisoners. But the system was locked down tight, encrypted with Zorgon ciphers beyond even Timothy's skill to break. The blast door shuddered as Zorgon troops began hammering at it from the other side, the screech of cutting torches filling the air. They were out of time. Timothy took aim at the pulsing heart of the vile machine, his face grim. "Jackson, get ready to grab them. This ain't going to be pretty." He fired, the plasma bolt striking the device dead center. It exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke, the mind web shattering. The captives convulsed as the neural links were severed, their eyes flying open in shock and agony. Jackson hurried to Zara's side, supporting her as she slumped forward. Around them the other prisoners stirred groggily, looks of confusion and dawning horror on their faces. But the machine wasn't done. Damaged beyond repair, it began to overload, energy cascading through its broken circuits. The room shook as the device went critical, threatening to take the entire level with it. Half leading, half dragging their dazed charges, they fled the chamber, just as the blast doors gave way. Zorgon troops stormed in, disruptor rifles spitting deadly green fire. Timothy and Jackson returned fire as they ran, the acrid smell of ozone and charred flesh filling the corridors. The base heaved like a wounded beast around them, secondary explosions tearing through its innards as the mind control machine went supernova. They barely made it to the hangar bay before the entire section collapsed behind them, the Zorgon's anguished screams swallowed by the inferno. Alarms howled and emergency bulkheads slammed shut as the facility's systems struggled to contain the catastrophic damage. In the chaos, they managed to commandeer a Zorgon transport, its sleek black hull still warm from re-entry. Timothy threw himself into the pilot's seat, coaxing the unfamiliar controls to life with desperate haste. "Strap in," he barked to the others. "This is going to be a bumpy ride." The ship tore free of the crumbling hangar mere heartbeats, before the entire mountainside disintegrated, the secret base vanishing in an apocalyptic plume of fire and debris. Timothy pushed the engines to full throttle, riding the edge of the shockwave as they clawed for open sky. But their escape did not go unnoticed. A squadron of Zorgon fighters rose to meet them, their angular silhouettes cutting through the smoke-choked air like vengeful raptors. Disruptor bolts stitched the clouds around the fleeing transport, seeking to drag them back down into the maelstrom. In the co-pilot's seat, Jackson frantically worked to bring the ship's weapon systems online. "I hope you're as good a pilot as you say, human, because we've got company." Timothy just grinned savagely as he wrenched the ship into a corkscrew dive, the G-forces slamming them back into their seats. "Then let's give 'em a proper welcome." What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse above the burning ruins of the base, the transport bobbing and weaving like a prize fighter as the fighters swarmed around it. Timothy pushed the ship and his skills to their limits, pulling maneuvers that would have pulped a lesser pilot. But even he couldn't evade the Zorgon's fury forever. Disruptor bolts raked the ship's shields, alarms shrilling as the barrier's strength plummeted. One more solid hit would crack them open like an egg. Jackson sagged in his chair, despair etched on his face. "It's no use, there's too many of them." Timothy just gritted his teeth and prepared to make his final stand. But just as the Zorgons closed in for the kill, a new wave of contacts appeared on the scopes, dozens of them, screaming in from high orbit. "Unidentified craft? This is Admiral Thorne of the Human Alliance. Looks like you could use a hand." Timothy let out a whoop of relief, as human fighters fell upon the Zorgons like wolves among sheep. The sky lit up with the fury of their exchange, the Zorgon squadron scattering before the onslaught. "So you're a sight for sore eyes, Admiral." Timothy laughed into the comms. "Impeccable timing as always." "Get your people to safety, Harris," Thorne replied, his voice hard. "We'll cover you, but hurry, I fear this is only the beginning." As the transport rocketed away from the battle, the glow of the burning base fading behind them, the full weight of Thorn's words sank in. The Zorgon's secret was out, their schemes exposed. They would not let such a blow go unanswered. Over the comms, reports flooded in of Zorgon forces moving on 100 worlds, their warships darkening the skies over a dozen systems. What had been a Cold War fought in shadows had just exploded into open conflict. The galaxy teetered on the brink of annihilation. In the hold of the ship, Princess Zara and the other freed captives huddled together, their faces haunted by the horrors they'd endured and the trials yet to come. Timothy met Jackson's gaze, saw the same grim realization reflected there. They had won the battle, but the war for the galaxy's very soul had only just begun. The firestorm of the Zorgon invasion lit the skies of Ither, the once peaceful planet now a battleground. Dropships disgorged hordes of scaled warriors, their disruptor rifles spitting green death. The Ithorian defenders fought valiantly, but were driven back, outmatched by superior numbers and firepower. In the royal palace, now a makeshift command center, Princess Zara stood before a holographic display of the planet, her face grim. Red icons denoting Zorgon forces swarmed across the continents, threatening to overrun key cities. "Your Highness, the capital's defenses are crumbling," a haggard Ithorian general reported. "We can't hold them." Zara's fists clenched. "We must evacuate the civilians, consolidate our remaining troops. We fight for every inch." She turned to Timothy and Jackson, her eyes hard. "Our forces are buying time, but it's not enough. We need those allies." They raced to the battered freighter that had brought them to Ithor, dodging Zorgon patrols and strafing runs. The ship leaped to hyperspace, streaking towards the first world on their list, the Naxian homeworld. But as they dropped out of hyperspace, their hearts sank. Zorgon warships hung in orbit, their hulls still scorched from battle. The planet below was pocked with the scars of orbital bombardment. "We're too late," Jackson whispered. "The Zorgons got here first." A furtive transmission from the surface told a grim tale. The Naxian Primarch, one of the captives they'd freed, had been exposed as a Zorgon puppet. In the chaos, the Zorgons had moved in, crushing resistance. They found similar stories on the next world, and the next. The Zorgon tendrils ran deep. On the fourth planet, a Zorgon kill team nearly ended their mission before it began, a plasma bolt missing Timothy's head by inches as they fled back to their ship. But there were glimmers of hope. A few leaders had escaped the Zorgon net. A handful of worlds warned by Ithor's plight had rooted out the infiltrators. Slowly, painstakingly, a coalition began to form. As they gathered allies, a disturbing pattern emerged. The Zorgon plan was no hasty gambit. It had been decades in the making, a slow rot eating at the galaxy's foundations. Puppet leaders, manufactured conflicts, the relentless subversion of governments, all leading to this moment. A coded message from Princess Zara added urgency to their mission. The Zorgons had unveiled a new weapon, a planet killer that could scour a world of life in moments. Ithor was to be the first test. "The Zorgons will burn Ithor as an example," Zara said, her holographic face etched with fatigue and grief. "Then they will offer a choice to the rest of the galaxy. Submit or die." Timothy's jaw clenched. "There's one way to stop that weapon. We hit the Zorgons where they live, cut the head off the beast." Jackson nodded grimly. "A strike at the heart of their empire, it's the only way." Their ragtag fleet gathered at the edge of Zorgon space, a polyglot mix of designs and species, united by desperate purpose. Timothy looked out at the assembled ships, his heart heavy with the weight of the task ahead. "No rousing speeches," he said over the comm. "You all know what's at stake. The Zorgons think they've already won. Let's show them what happens when the galaxy fights back." The fleet leaped forward, hurtling towards the looming shadow of the Zorgon throne world. And on the bridge of the flagship, Timothy and Jackson prepared for the fight of their lives. Thousands of starships, human and alien vessels united in desperate purpose, streaked through hyperspace towards the looming shadow of the Zorgon throne world. On the bridge of the flagship, Timothy and Jackson pored over the latest intelligence reports, their faces grim. Suddenly, the sensors pinged an alert. A new contact had appeared, a lone ship on an intercept course. Timothy tensed, his hand dropping to his sidearm, but as the ship grew closer, he saw it was no Zorgon craft. The angular vessel docked with a clang, and a towering figure strode onto the bridge. It was a Zorgon, but unlike any Timothy had ever seen. Its scales were a mottled grey, its eyes a piercing blue rather than the usual reptilian yellow. "I am Commander Zorak," the Zorgon said, his voice a rasping hiss. "I lead those who have seen the truth, that the Zorgon Empire's path leads only to ruin. We rebel against the tyranny of the High Admiral and his sycophants." Timothy eyed Zorak warily, his rifle never wavering. "And why should we trust you?" Zorak spread his clawed hands. "Because I have seen the superweapon. I know its location, its defenses. Without my help, you fly to your doom." The rebel Zorgon's information proved invaluable. As they dropped out of hyperspace near the construction site, the Allied fleet moved with precision, each ship slotting into its assigned position. But the Zorgons were waiting for them. A swarm of warships so numerous they blotted out the stars surged to meet them, disruptor cannons spitting emerald death. Timothy's fighter, a heavily modified scimitar with enough firepower to take on a cruiser, leapt ahead of the formation. A swarm of Zorgon fighters rose to meet him, their hulls glinting in the light of the distant sun. What followed was a kaleidoscope of destruction, a dance of death on a grand scale. Timothy jinked and juked, his guns never silent as he stitched the enemy formations with fire. Beside him, alien fighters of a dozen different designs fought with equal ferocity, united in their desperation. But for every Zorgon ship they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The Allied losses mounted, the comm channels filling with the screams of the dying. "So we can't take much more of this," Jackson cried, his own fighter shuddering under a barrage of disruptor bolts. Timothy gritted his teeth, his eyes fixed on the looming shape of the superweapons construction platform. "We don't need to beat them. We just need to get inside that thing. All ships, concentrate fire on Sector 14 Alpha." Under the combined might of the Allied barrage, the Zorgon defenses crumbled. A hole appeared in their lines, a path to the platform. Dozens of assault shuttles, each packed with the most elite warriors of a dozen species, punched through the gap. At their head was Timothy's own ship, with Jackson beside him. They hit the platform in a storm of fire, disruptor bolts and plasma blasts ricocheting off the hulls. The assault ramps slammed down and the strike teams poured out, Timothy and Jackson at their head. Inside it was a nightmare labyrinth of twisting corridors and cavernous assembly bays. Zorgon soldiers, the cream of their warrior caste, met them at every turn, their fire so thick it seemed to fill the air. But Timothy was a whirlwind of destruction, his rifle and vibroblades reaping a terrible toll. Beside him Jackson fought with equal ferocity, his own weapons spitting death. Step by blood-soaked step, they fought their way deeper into the platform, the drumbeat of distant explosions spurring them on. They breached blast doors, overrode security locks, all the while racing against the clock. At last, they stood before the final barrier, the massive blast doors of the superweapons control room. Timothy slapped a breaching charge against the unyielding metal, his face grim. "Get ready," he growled. "Whatever's waiting for us in there, it won't go down easy." The doors blew inward in a storm of shrapnel and smoke. Timothy was first through the gap, rifle up and spitting fire, but he stumbled to a halt, his eyes wide. There, standing amid a forest of control panels and flickering holodisplays, was the Zorgon High Admiral himself. The towering alien warlord was a nightmare vision in his ornate battle armor, his eyes burning with hate. Timothy didn't waste time on words. He leapt forward, his own vibroblade igniting in a blaze of azure energy. The two warriors met in a clash of blades, the air sizzling with the discharge. It was a battle of titans, a contest of skill and strength and sheer unbridled ferocity. They traded blows faster than the eye could follow, their blades leaving trails of glowing after-images. Around them, Jackson and the strike team fought desperately to hold back the High Admiral's elite guard. Disruptor bolts and plasma blasts crisscrossed the room, consoles exploding in showers of sparks. But Timothy never wavered. For every blow the High Admiral struck, he returned two in kind. His blade was a whirlwind, a blur of light that seemed to come from every direction at once. With a final, desperate lunge, Timothy drove his blade through the High Admiral's chest plate. The Zorgon warlord staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. But even as the High Admiral fell, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. The holodisplays flashed red, the Zorgon script scrolling by in a frantic cascade. Timothy leapt to the control console, his fingers flying over the unfamiliar controls. But it was no use. The firing sequence was locked in, the energy levels rising with every passing second. Jackson met his gaze, a sad smile on his face. It's the only way, someone has to do it. He gripped Timothy's shoulder. Get our people out of here. And tell Zara. Tell her I'm sorry. Before Timothy could stop him, Jackson was gone, sprinting down the corridor towards the pulsing heart of the superweapon. Timothy clenched his fists, his heart heavy, but there was no time to grieve. He turned to the strike team, his voice hard. You heard the man, let's move. They fought their way back to the assault shuttles, every step a battle. The Zorgons, sensing their impending doom, fought with the fury of the damned. As the last shuttle lifted off, Timothy looked back at the construction platform. Deep within its bowels, he knew Jackson was making his final stand. The explosion, when it came, was like a second sun blooming in the void. The platform disintegrated, consumed in a maelstrom of light and fury. The shockwave caught the fleeing shuttles, tossing them like leaves in a hurricane. In the aftermath, as the Allied fleet regrouped and tended to its wounded, the true extent of their victory became clear. The Zorgon armada, caught at the epicenter of the blast, was a shattered ruin. Rebel Zorgon ships flitted among the debris, hunting down the scattered survivors. On the bridge of the flagship, Timothy watched numbly as the reports flooded in. Zorgon resistance was crumbling across the galaxy, their fleets surrendering en masse. Commander Zorak's rebels were already moving to secure key Zorgon strongholds. But even as the cheers of victory rang out, a new alarm sounded. The sensors were picking up a massive energy surge, a distortion in the very fabric of space-time. On the view screen, a rift yawned open, a swirling maelstrom of darkness and eldritch light, and from its depths, something vast and ancient and unspeakably malevolent began to emerge. Timothy felt a chill run down his spine. They had won the war, but now, it seemed, they faced a far greater threat, a threat that could consume not just the galaxy, but the entire universe itself. As the eldritch horror of the Vorlon spilled forth from the rift, Timothy stared in disbelief at the view screen. Nightmarish creatures, all writhing tentacles and gnashing maws, swarmed over the Allied ships like locusts. Plasma cannons and fusion torpedoes slammed into their ranks, but the Vorlon seemed to absorb the energy, their forms shimmering and reforming. Timothy gritted his teeth, his mind racing. This was an enemy beyond anything they had faced before, an enemy that seemed to defy the very laws of the universe. He turned to Commander Zorak, the rebel Zorgon leader who now stood beside him. Zorak, what do you know of these Vorlons? How do we fight them? The Zorgon shook his head, his eyes wide with a fear Timothy had never seen in the proud warrior race. They are the ancient ones, the masters who guided our conquest from the shadows. Their technology, their power. It is beyond our understanding. As reports flooded in of Vorlon attacks across the galaxy, the scale of the crisis became clear. The Vorlons were not just invading, they were reclaiming what they saw as their rightful domain. In a desperate war council, leaders from a dozen races gathered aboard Timothy's flagship. Old grievances and rivalries were cast aside in the face of this existential threat. In a historic moment, Timothy was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied forces, a recognition of humanity's pivotal role in the fight against the Zorgons. But as the war raged on, It became clear that conventional tactics were useless against the Vorlons. Their ships seemed to phase in and out of reality, shrugging off the most powerful weapons like raindrops. Entire fleets were lost in futile engagements. Timothy knew they needed a new approach. They needed to understand their enemy. In a daring raid, he led a hand-picked team of his best warriors and infiltrated Vorlon space. They fought their way aboard a Vorlon ship, battling past nightmarish defenders to secure a sample of their technology. But the price was high. As they fought their way back to the extraction point, Timothy watched in horror as his friends fell one by one, torn apart by the eldritch horrors. He barely made it back to his ship, clutching the strange Vorlon artifact, the screams of the dying still ringing in his ears. The Allied scientists pored over the captured technology, trying to unravel its secrets. What they found shook them to their core. The Vorlon's power was drawn directly from the fabric of space-time itself, channeled through the rift torn open by the Zorgon superweapon's destruction. As long as the rift remained open, the Vorlons were nigh invincible. A grim realization settled over the Allied Council. To defeat the Vorlons, they would have to seal the rift, but the energy required for such a feat was staggering. They would need a bomb of unimaginable power, a quantum singularity device that could collapse the rift. And to deliver it, they would need a ship capable of penetrating deep into Vorlon space, a mission from which there could be no return. As the Allies prepared for this final, desperate gambit, a transmission came through on a channel Timothy had thought forever silenced. It was Jackson, the friend he had thought lost in the destruction of the Zorgon superweapon. But Jackson was alive, pulled through the rift into the heart of Vorlon space. And he had not gone quietly into the abyss. In a final act of defiance, Jackson had stolen the key to the Vorlon's power, a device he called the Quantum Duality Matrix. With it, he said, the Allies could turn the Vorlon's own power against them. Hope, long thought lost, surged through the Allied ranks. But time was running out. The Vorlons, sensing the theft of their precious device, were closing in on Jackson's position. The final battle was about to begin, a struggle not just for the fate of the galaxy, but for the very fabric of reality itself. "This is it," he said, his voice hard as steel. "We use the Matrix to slip past the Vorlon defenses and detonate the bomb at the heart of the rift. The Allied fleet will keep their forces occupied. It's a one-way trip, but it's our only shot." Zara nodded grimly, her hand resting on the hilt of her energy blade. "We're with you, Timothy, till the end." Zorak bared his teeth in a predatory grin. "Let's show these extra-dimensional bastards what it means to fight the free races of the galaxy." They boarded a small, sleek craft, little more than a heavily armed shuttle. As they rocketed towards the rift, the Matrix's glow intensified, cloaking them from the Vorlon's all-seeing gaze. But as they crossed the threshold into Vorlon space, reality itself seemed to warp and twist around them. Colors inverted, shapes distorted, and the laws of physics became mere suggestions. Zara gasped as a writhing tentacle of pure energy lashed across their viewport, leaving a trail of searing afterimages. "By the gods," she whispered, "what is this place?" "The realm of the Vorlons," Zorak growled, "a dimension of pure thought and energy where they twist reality to their whims." Suddenly a voice crackled over the comm, deep and resonant. "I have been waiting for you, champions of the younger races." An image formed on the view screen, a shimmering construct of light and data. It had the form of a humanoid, but its features were angular and alien. "I am Prometheus," the figure said, "the last echo of a race that fought the Vorlons long before your kind crawled from the primordial ooze. I have watched your struggle, and I offer my aid." Timothy leaned forward, hope warring with suspicion. "Why help us?" Under Prometheus's guidance, they navigated the surreal hellscape of Vorlon space. They dodged hyperdimensional vortices that threatened to tear them apart, fought off nightmarish creatures that defied description, and puzzled through Escher-like labyrinths of folded space-time. But even as they neared the rift, the Vorlons unleashed their deadliest guardians. Vast entities of pure psionic might bore down on their tiny craft, their very thoughts enough to shatter minds and rend matter. Timothy gritted his teeth as he wrenched the ship through impossible maneuvers, the Matrix's power, the only thing keeping them from being unmade. Beside him, Zara and Zorak unleashed a barrage of exotic weapons, tearing at the Guardians with blasts of antimatter and graviton pulses. And then, rising before them like a colossus of pure malice, was the Vorlon Overlord itself. A being of unfathomable power, it regarded them with the cold contempt of a god. "You dare!" it thundered, its voice a psychic lance that pierced their very souls. "You dare defy the masters of reality itself!" Timothy stood tall, the matrix blazing in his hands. "We dare," he said, his voice ringing with the conviction of 1,000 worlds. "For the freedom of every sentient being, we dare." What followed was a battle beyond the scope of mortal comprehension. The Overlord lashed out with forces that could reshape continents, while Timothy and his team fought back with every scrap of cunning and courage they possessed. They danced through dimensions, their very atoms singing with the strain of the Matrix's power. In a final, desperate gambit, Timothy and Zara plunged towards the heart of the rift, the quantum singularity bomb primed and ready. Behind them, Zorak and Prometheus held off the Overlord's fury, buying them the precious seconds they needed. The bomb detonated, a lance of pure nothingness that tore at the fabric of reality itself. The rift collapsed in on itself, a howling maelstrom of contradictory forces, and with a scream of unbridled rage, the Vorlon Overlord was dragged into the abyss, cut off from the source of its power. But the victory was bitter. As the rift sealed, Zorak was consumed by a tide of roiling energy, his final roar of defiance echoing across the cosmos, and Prometheus, its ancient purpose fulfilled, shattered into 1,000,000 shards of light. Timothy and Zara emerged into a galaxy forever changed. The Vorlon threat was ended, and the Zorgon Empire lay in ruins. But as they limped back to the Allied fleet, their ship battered and scarred, they knew their work was just beginning. The task of rebuilding, of forging a new era of peace and cooperation, stretched before them. But for now they allowed themselves a moment of triumph, a moment to honor the sacrifices of the fallen. They had stared into the abyss, had fought the very gods themselves, and they had emerged victorious, the champions of a galaxy's freedom. As the shock waves of the Vorlon War faded, a fragile peace settled over the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, the allied races set about the daunting task of rebuilding, their shared sacrifices forging new bonds of friendship and cooperation. At the center of it all stood Timothy and Princess Zara, the heroes who had led the charge against the Vorlons. Their names were spoken with reverence and gratitude by billions, their deeds already passing into legend. And so it was with great fanfare that they were invited to Ethor, to be honored in a grand celebration, marking the dawn of a new era. As their ship descended through the clouds, the gleaming spires of the Ethorian capital rising to meet them, Timothy and Zara allowed themselves a moment of joy, of pride in what they had accomplished. But the moment was short-lived. As they disembarked, they were met not by cheering crowds but by a grim-faced delegation of Ethorian officials. At their head was Kyle, Jackson's brother, his eyes cold and hard. "Kyle, what's the meaning of this?" Zara asked, a sense of unease growing in her gut. Kyle's lip curled in a sneer. "The meaning, dear princess, is that the Ethorian people have grown tired of being the galaxy's doormats. While you were off playing hero, some of us were thinking about Ethor's future." He gestured, and a phalanx of armed guards stepped forward, their weapons trained on Timothy and Zara. "I'm afraid your role in that future has been reassessed." In the chaos following the war, Kyle explained, he had staged a coup, seizing control of the Ethorian government. No longer would Ethor bow to the whims of other races. Under his rule, the Ethorians would take their rightful place as the dominant power in the galaxy. As Kyle's troops surrounded them, Timothy and Zara were left reeling, the full weight of this betrayal sinking in. The peace they had fought so hard for, the sacrifices they had made, had it all been for nothing? But there was no time for despair. As they were marched away under heavy guard, Timothy caught Zara's eye, a silent message passing between them. They had faced worse odds before. They would fight this new threat as they had all the others. The galaxy needed them now more than ever. Whispers of Kyle's treachery spread like wildfire, and soon reports were flooding in of surprise attacks by Ithorian forces across the galaxy. Planets that had only just begun to rebuild now found themselves under siege once more, their defenses still shattered from the Vorlon War. But these were no ordinary Ithorian soldiers. Enhanced with Vorlon technology and Ithorian bioengineering, Kyle's troops were faster, stronger, and more deadly than any seen before. Against these super soldiers, even the battle-hardened veterans of the Allied forces struggled to hold the line. For Timothy and Zara, the fight became personal. Breaking free from their captors, they found themselves hunted across Ithorian space, forced to constantly stay one step ahead of Kyle's relentless pursuit. They saw firsthand the devastation Kyle's new order had unleashed. Cities in ruins, populations enslaved, entire cultures wiped out. The dream of a peaceful, united galaxy had never seemed further away. But they would not give in to despair. In secret meetings on remote outposts and hidden bases, they gathered what remained of their allies, forging a plan to strike back at the heart of Kyle's power. It was a desperate gambit, but they had no choice. Failure would mean the end of everything they had fought for. And so on a moonless night they launched their attack. Infiltrating Kyle's stronghold, they fought their way through wave after wave of super soldiers, the corridors ringing with the clash of blades and the sizzle of energy weapons. Every step was bought in blood, every inch of ground paid for with the lives of friends and comrades. But they pushed on, driven by a grim determination. At last they breached the inner sanctum, the final defenses falling before their onslaught, and there, waiting for them, was Kyle himself. But as they confronted the usurper, a chilling realization dawned. Kyle was not alone. A presence, ancient and malevolent, hung in the air, whispering poisonous thoughts into Kyle's mind. With mounting horror they realized the truth. The Vorlon remnant, that last insidious fragment of the enemy they thought vanquished, had survived, and it had found in Kyle the perfect pawn to resurrect its dreams of conquest. The battle that followed was like nothing they had faced before. Kyle, infused with the Vorlon's dark power, was a force of nature, his every blow shaking the very foundations of the stronghold. But Timothy and Zara would not yield. Drawing on every last reserve of strength and courage, they met Kyle's fury head-on, their weapons blazing with righteous fire. In the end, it was Princess Zara who struck the decisive blow. Her sword found its mark, piercing Kyle's dark heart. With a scream of denied rage, the Vorlon entity fled its broken host, the psychic backlash sending them all reeling. But the victory had come at a terrible price. As the dust settled, Timothy cradled Zara's broken form, her life's blood pooling on the cold stone floor. With a trembling hand, she pressed the quantum duality matrix into his grasp. "Finish it," she whispered, her voice fading. "Don't let our sacrifice be in vain." Tears streaming down his face, Timothy activated the matrix for the last time. The air shimmered and split as he tore open the fabric of reality, opening a portal to the Vorlon's dark dimension. With a howl of despair and fury, he hurled the Vorlon remnant through, sealing the breach behind it forever. But the effort drained the last of the Matrix's power, and with it, the last of Timothy's life force. As he collapsed beside Zara, his vision fading, he saw the first rays of dawn filtering through the shattered walls. A new day, bought with their sacrifice. And with that, Timothy, hero of the galaxy, slipped away into the eternal night, his duty done, his war finally over. Princess Zara stood alone on the balcony of the Ithorian palace, her eyes fixed on the horizon as the sun dipped below the war-scarred landscape. The weight of her new responsibilities pressed down on her like a physical force, threatening to crush her. She closed her eyes, remembering Timothy's last moments, the look of grim determination on his face as he sacrificed himself to banish the Vorlon remnant. A single tear traced its way down her cheek. In the days that followed, Zara threw herself into the work of rebuilding. She met with leaders from across the galaxy, forging new alliances and mending old wounds. But progress was slow, and setbacks were many. On the shattered worlds of the Zorgon Empire, warlords and opportunists fought for control, leaving a trail of bloodshed and chaos in their wake. On Aethor, factions that had once supported Kale's rebellion now chafed under Zara's rule, their resentments simmering just below the surface. But Zara refused to give in to despair. She worked tirelessly, mediating disputes, distributing aid, and slowly, painstakingly, piecing together a new order from the shattered remnants of the old. As the months turned into years, the scars of war began to fade, and a fragile peace took hold. But even as the galaxy began to heal, a new threat loomed. Strange anomalies began to appear, pockets of warped spacetime where the laws of physics seemed to break down. Ships would vanish, only to reappear light years away, their crews driven mad by impossible visions. Planets would be rocked by inexplicable tremors, their surfaces buckling and twisting into nightmarish landscapes. Zara consulted with the greatest scientific minds of the galaxy, and the truth became clear. The use of the quantum duality matrix had fundamentally destabilized the fabric of reality. The universe itself was unraveling, and if left unchecked, it would eventually collapse entirely. Faced with this existential crisis, Zara made a fateful decision. Drawing on the knowledge and technology left behind by Prometheus and the ancient race that had once fought the Vorlons, she initiated a project of staggering scale and ambition, the creation of a new artificial universe, a safe haven where life could continue even if their own universe died. The construction took decades, taxing the resources and ingenuity of the entire galaxy. Vast shipyards sprang up in orbit around Aethor, churning out the components for the massive, reality-altering machines. Teams of scientists and engineers worked around the clock, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. As the project neared completion, Zara could feel her own strength waning. The strain of her responsibilities, combined with the lingering effects of her injuries from the final battle with Kale, had taken a heavy toll. She knew she would not live to see the new universe born. In her final days, Zara summoned the leaders of the galaxy to her bedside. With a voice weakened by age and illness, she spoke of her vision for the future, of a new beginning free from the cycles of war and destruction that had plagued their old universe. She entrusted the completion of the project and the future of their people to a new generation of leaders, urging them to learn from the mistakes of the past and build a better tomorrow. As Zara breathed her last, a sense of profound loss swept through the galaxy. The last of the great heroes of the Vorlon War was gone, and with her, an era had ended. But even as they mourned, the people of the galaxy looked to the future with hope. The artificial universe was nearing completion, a testament to the indomitable will and ingenuity of a united galaxy. As the final components were slotted into place and the activation sequence began, the survivors of the old universe gathered to witness the birth of something new and wondrous. And as the last stars of their dying universe flickered out one by one, the people of the galaxy stepped forward into their new home, ready to face whatever challenges and wonders the future might hold. They knew that the legacy of heroes like Timothy and Zara would live on, a shining beacon of courage and sacrifice to guide them in the darkness. And though the path ahead was uncertain, they would face it together, united by the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of war and loss. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.